I stood by the window watching as my father, without saying a word, loaded the suitcases into the trunk of his car. That morning, he told me he was leaving for a few days, but he didn't explain why it was strange. He usually gave notice in advance if he planned to be away for a while. The sense of anxiety grew inside me, with each passing second. When the door slammed shut behind him, Megan, my stepmother, stood up from the table so abruptly that her chair crashed to the floor. I turned to her, expecting at least some explanation, but she just walked into the living room without a word. It was the beginning of something wrong. I knew it. I felt it, but I couldn't explain it. Never before had I noticed such coldness in the house as I did today. My father left in a hurry, and Megan, she wasn't herself. There was something in her eyes that I couldn't decipher, and the silence in the house seemed deafening. Several days passed, but the strange tension that had arisen between Megan and me in the barn hadn't disappeared. I tried to spend time away from the house avoiding her, but it was difficult. Every encounter with her reminded me of that conversation. I felt that something had changed between us, but I couldn't figure out what exactly. One evening as the sun was setting, Megan suddenly approached me in the kitchen. I was sitting at the table staring at my phone screen while she was making tea. "Do you want to go for a walk?" Her voice was unexpectedly soft. I was surprised by her suggestion. We rarely spent time together, and I had no idea why she suddenly wanted to. "I don't know," I mumbled without lifting my eyes from the phone. Let's go to the old factory across the river," she said, placing a cup of tea in front of me. "I haven't been there in a while, and it feels like the perfect time." The old factory stood not far from our house, past the hill and the river where the locals once worked, but now it was abandoned. The place always seemed eerie and empty to me, but there was something captivating about it, almost as if it held forgotten secrets. Without knowing why, I agreed. I nodded. Maybe I was curious to find out why she wanted to take me there. We quickly got ready and stepped out into the cool evening. The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky in dark pink and orange hues. We walked in silence, but there was no awkwardness between us, just the weight of words that hadn't yet been spoken. When we reached the river, I stopped by the bridge and looked at the water. The evening was quiet, with only a soft breeze rustling the leaves. "Did you used to come here?" Often I asked, hoping the question would ease the tension. "A little." "I did once," Megan replied, coming closer and gazing at the distant factory. "This place reminds me of how things used to be simpler." I stayed silent, listening to her. Her voice was tinged with longing for something distant. We crossed the old wooden bridge and reached the factory. The tall walls collapsed. Roofs and rusted metal structures created a gloomy atmosphere. Everything here seemed frozen in time, and the silence was almost oppressive. We reached the old gates, which led to the factory's courtyard. Megan stopped and looked at me. "Sometimes I think all our problems are just mistakes of the past that we can't let go of," she said, as if speaking not just about herself, but about me as well. I didn't know what to say. Her words were unexpected, but I felt that she was talking about something deeper, something personal, and at that moment, among the crumbling walls, I realized that something strange had been happening between us for a long time, something I hadn't noticed before. We walked up to the wall, and Megan sat down on an old concrete block. I stood beside her, looking down at her. Her eyes were full of thoughts, and I could tell she wanted to say something important, but hesitated. "Have you ever thought that you might lose control over your life?" She suddenly asked, her voice quiet, almost a whisper. I looked at her, unsure of what to say. The question caught me off guard and felt heavy. "Sometimes," I replied, "but I try not to think about it." Megan nodded, and for a moment we fell silent again. The wind picked up, and suddenly I felt her presence more intensely, as if everything around us had disappeared, leaving just the two of us. It was a strange feeling, but I couldn't ignore it. "Sometimes I just want to leave," she said softly, her gaze distant. "Leave and forget everything. Leave behind everything. That's suffocating me." I didn't know how to respond. My thoughts were racing, and I understood that her words carried more than just a desire to escape. It was a cry for help that I couldn't ignore but didn't know how to answer. At that moment, she stood up and approached me. I felt the tension between us growing, and it scared me. Megan stopped for a moment, looked at me with her sad eyes, and then, without saying a word, moved even closer. The next moment her lips touched mine and the whole world seemed to freeze. It wasn't like I had imagined it was quiet, but at the same time decisive, as if she had made a decision and couldn't take it back. When she pulled away, I didn't know what to say. We stood in silence, surrounded by the gray walls of the old factory, and I understood that nothing would ever be the same again. We were walking back home through the old factory, and the silence between us became almost palpable. Megan walked beside me, but her thoughts were clearly somewhere far away. After her lips had touched mine near the crumbling walls, I couldn't collect my thoughts. I didn't know what it meant or what to do next. Megan hadn't said anything after the kiss. She had just stepped away as if nothing had happened. Honestly, it was confusing. My heart was pounding so hard that I was afraid she could hear it. Everything seemed unreal. We walked in silence again, and I tried to understand what was happening between us. I should have said something taken. A step back explained to myself and her that this was wrong, but instead I walked beside her for some reason, keeping silent. When we reached the edge of the factory where the overgrown path to the house began, Megan suddenly stopped and looked at me. Her eyes gleamed in the twilight, and I saw something in them that I had never noticed before. It wasn't the cold, restrained gaze I was used to. There was something human: vulnerability, fear, maybe both. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, breaking the silence. Her voice was trembling, which was unusual for her. I hesitated, not knowing how to respond. That sorry made me feel even more uncomfortable for what I asked. Even though deep down I knew exactly what she was apologizing for, she averted her gaze and nervously ran her hand through her hair. At that moment, I realized that she didn't know what to do next either. For hesitating, she began but didn't finish. She took a deeper breath and continued for what I shouldn't have done. My thoughts were racing. What did she mean? She shouldn't have kissed me. She shouldn't have said what she did. Megan, I started trying to find the right words that I didn't finish because she raised her hand, signaling that she didn't want to hear excuses. "Please don't," she interrupted. "It's all too complicated. I just don't know how to explain it." I fell silent again, unsure of what to say in response. Our conversation felt more like a dialogue between two people who were trapped in a strange situation with no easy way out. And in that moment, I didn't want to complicate things further. "Maybe we should just go home," I suggested, hoping it would at least ease the tension. A little Megan looked at me with a certain sadness in her eyes, but nodded. We continued down the path. The wind picked up, and I noticed how she pulled her thin jacket closer to herself, as if trying to shield herself not so much from the cold, but from the weight of what had happened. On the way back, I tried to convince myself that it had just been a moment of weakness, nothing more. We both knew it was wrong, and she had even tried to apologize. We could leave it at that, but something inside me screamed that it wasn't that simple, that kiss her words. All of it had left too many questions. I wasn't ready to answer. When we returned home, the evening had fully settled in, and it was dark outside. Megan stopped at the porch and looked at me, as if she wanted to say something important. I froze, waiting for her words. "Listen," she began, "let's just forget that this happened. Please, we can't let this continue." Her voice was firm, but there was a plea in it. I felt an inner conflict again. On the one hand, I knew she was right, but on the other, there was another voice in my head that wouldn't let me just let it go. "Yes," I forced out, though the words felt insincere. "That's probably for the best." She sighed with relief, but her face remained tense. It felt like we were playing a game. Neither of us wanted to play, but we were already too deep into it. We went inside, and the silence that greeted us there was even more oppressive than before. My father was still away, and his absence seemed to highlight the growing chasm between Megan and me. I wanted to go straight to my room and forget about the day, but she stopped me at the doorway of the kitchen. "William," her voice was quiet again, but more confident than before. "Let's stop this here." "Nothing else will happen," I nodded, but her words kept gnawing at me. "Nothing else will happen." It sounded too decisive, but I knew it wasn't that simple. "All right," I said, not really believing that she was certain. We both tried to convince ourselves. It was the end, but the tension in the air suggested otherwise. I went upstairs, leaving her alone in the kitchen, lying in bed. I couldn't sleep for a long time. Her words, her kiss, and the feelings I was trying to suppress swirled in my head. Something inside me resisted, as if I didn't know what I truly wanted. In the middle of the night, I woke up with a strange feeling. I went to the window and saw Megan standing on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, staring into the distance. There was something in her silhouette that made my heart clench. I wanted to go to her but stopped myself just in time. The next day I tried to avoid Megan. My father was still away, and the tension that had been growing between us became almost tangible. I would leave the house early in the morning and return late in the evening, hoping that I could push away the thoughts that kept invading my mind more and more. But no matter how hard I tried, something inside me wouldn't give me peace. Something kept pulling me back, and I knew I wouldn't be able to run from it for long. By the evening, I decided to go to the old garage that was a bit further from the house. It was abandoned. My father never used it, and it was one of those places where I could be alone with my thoughts. I sat on the wooden bench by the wall, watching the sunset through the cracks in the walls. This corner reminded me of those days when everything was simpler, when there wasn't this pressure hanging over my life. I heard the door to the garage creak open, and my heart skipped a beat. Megan stood in the doorway, her silhouette clearly outlined against the fading light. I flinched, not expecting her to be here. She quietly closed the door behind her and came closer, sitting down softly on the bench next to me. We didn't say a word, just silence and the sound of the wind outside. "I thought you ran away from me," she finally said, her voice soft but filled with a strange sadness. I just didn't know what to say. I admitted feeling the tension between us growing with every second. Mian looked at me, and in her gaze I noticed uncertainty. It was strange seeing her like this. She was usually composed and calm, but in that moment something in her had changed. Her eyes searched mine, and when our gazes met, I felt the silence between us start to scream. "We need to talk," she said, quietly, turning her eyes away again. I can't ignore this. We can't just pretend nothing happened." I knew she was right, but I was afraid to hear what she had to say. Afraid it would change everything even more than it already had. "It was wrong," she continued, her voice trembling, "but I don't know what to do. I don't know how to stop this." We fell silent again. I didn't have the words. Everything that was happening felt wrong, but at the same time, I couldn't shake the thoughts that had been tormenting me since that moment. I knew she was waiting for an answer, but what could I say? "I'm sorry it was a mistake," but I knew those words wouldn't change anything. Megan stood up and slowly walked toward the window of the garage, stopping by the cracked glass where the weak light of the fading day filtered through. I watched as her dark silhouette blended into the old surroundings, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we had both gone too far. "I just don't want it to happen again," she said without turning to face me. But when she finally turned around, I saw in her eyes that things had already gone too far for us to simply step back. Megan took a few steps forward, coming closer to me. She stopped so close that I could hear her breathing. "This is wrong," she whispered, but I could see in her gaze that she didn't truly believe her own words. At that moment, a pause hung between us, one that seemed to last an eternity. I didn't know what drove me, but suddenly I stood up and came closer to her. She didn't step back. Her eyes met mine, and I felt the tension between us finally burst. It was like an instant decision, and the next moment our lips met again. The kiss was quiet, almost fleeting. It wasn't like the first one. There was no rush, no surprise. This time it felt deliberate, as if we both understood what it meant. She didn't pull away immediately, but in that moment time seemed to slow down. I could only hear our breathing and feel everything else around us fading away. When she finally stepped back, her eyes were filled with questions, but she didn't ask any of them. We just stood there looking at each other, knowing that the boundaries had been crossed once more, and neither of us knew how to go back. "We need to stop this," she whispered, but her voice was quiet and unsure. I didn't respond because I didn't know what to say inside. Everything was screaming that she was right, but I also knew that this wouldn't change. What had already happened? The day after the kiss in the garage, I decided that it was time to put an end to it. This was the wrong path, and I had to find a way to stop it. I felt that the situation had gone too far, but despite my decision, everything inside me was in turmoil. Megan and I had already crossed a line that would be hard to come back from every time I tried to convince myself that we could forget about it and move on. I realized that I was fooling myself. I spent the entire day outside wandering through the woods behind our house. Nature always helped me calm down and clear my thoughts. The trees rustle in the wind, and I felt a little clarity inside. I walked along the path that followed the old stream and then led deeper into the woods. With each step, I convinced myself that I would find the right words to explain everything to Megan. We needed to stop before it destroyed everything around us. By evening, I returned home. It was quiet, as I already knew. My father was delayed in the city for a few more days, so Megan and I had time to figure things out. I walked into the kitchen and saw her standing by the window. She hadn't heard me come in, lost in her thoughts. She held a cup of tea, but it was clear she had forgotten about it. The liquid had gone cold and no steam rose from the cup. Her gaze was focused somewhere far away, but I had no idea what she was thinking about. "Megan," I said quietly, and she flinched, turning around. Her eyes instantly narrowed, as if she was expecting me to start a difficult conversation she wasn't ready for. We were silent for several seconds, as if neither of us could decide who should speak first. I knew I needed to say something important, but all the words felt wrong. She took a step toward me, and I felt the same tension between us as before. "We need to talk," I finally said, trying to make my voice firm. She set the cup on the table and came closer, her face serious for a moment. I thought she also wanted to end everything, that she would agree with me and we would find a way to return to normal life. But something in her eyes worried me. "You're right," she replied quietly, almost in a whisper. "We really do need to talk." I opened my mouth to continue, but at that moment she stepped even closer and I felt her hand lightly touch my shoulder. The movement was subtle, but it said more than any words could. We fell silent again, and the unbearable tension between us seemed to swallow everything around. I realized that we were now standing at the edge of something bigger, and this moment would determine what would happen next. "This is wrong," I finally forced out, but the words sounded unconvincing, as if I didn't fully believe them. She nodded, but her eyes remained locked on mine. I wanted to add something else, but I didn't have time. Megan stepped forward and gently took my hand. I felt her slowly squeeze it, and my thoughts began to blur. Her touch was light, almost weightless, but there was something deep in it that made me freeze. "We shouldn't be doing this," I whispered again, though I knew it sounded pointless. At that moment, she suddenly lifted her hand and gently touched my cheek. The touch was almost accidental, but it changed everything. Her fingers brushed against my skin and I felt my throat go dry. I stood still, not knowing what would happen next, but in that moment she slowly leaned in closer. Her face was right next to mine and I knew I could stop this, but I didn't take a step back. The kiss was unexpected, but soft, like a light breeze in early autumn. This time it didn't feel like the previous ones. Everything was different, there was no rush, and its gentleness was confusing. I felt her hand slowly slide down from my cheek to my shoulder, and again there was no sudden movement, no urgency, just something I couldn't describe in words. When she pulled away, everything froze again. Time seemed to stop, and we stood in silence once more, not knowing what to do next. Her eyes were closed for a moment, and then she slowly opened them and looked at me. "I don't know how to stop," she confessed, her voice full of confusion. I understood that I didn't know how to stop either. It was like falling into an abyss, knowing you shouldn't go any further, but unable to hold back. "We shouldn't," I began, but she stopped me with her gaze. "I know," she said quietly, and in her eyes I saw the same turmoil that I was feeling. We both knew we had already crossed a line and there was no simple way back. I wanted to say something else to try to explain that this couldn't continue, but all the words seemed useless. Instead, we just stood there in silence, each of us struggling with what was happening inside. I felt like everything around us was falling apart, and I didn't know how to fix it. The rest of the evening passed in a strange, dragging silence. I could feel the tension in the house growing with every minute. Megan was sitting on the couch in the living room, curled up with a book in her hands, but I knew she wasn't reading. Her gaze was distant, as if she were far away. I couldn't find peace either. Our last conversation in that kiss had left something unsaid, a heavy, invisible weight pressing down on both of us. The house felt cold, even though it was a warm summer outside. I decided to act like nothing was happening and went up to my room. But despite my efforts, the thoughts that we had gone too far wouldn't leave my mind. I knew I needed to find a way out of this situation, but how we both understood that this shouldn't have happened yet. Somehow we couldn't stop. Night fell without me noticing. I lay in bed, but sleep wouldn't come. Thoughts raced through my head, and with each passing hour the feeling grew stronger that something was about to happen. I lay there with my eyes closed, but it felt like time was stretching endlessly, as if the night itself was resisting its end. Then, just as I was about to drift off, I heard a light knock on the door. My eyes flew open and I sat up in bed. My heart started pounding faster and I immediately knew who it was. The room was completely dark, with only a faint light from the moon filtering through the curtains. Megan's voice was quiet, almost imperceptible. I froze, feeling a knot tighten inside me. Her presence behind the door felt unreal, as if it were a dream. I knew she shouldn't be here, but I couldn't make myself respond. "Can I come in?" She whispered again, a little louder. This time I nodded. Though I knew she couldn't see it still, she didn't need my confirmation. The door slowly opened and she entered, closing it behind her so quietly it was almost inaudible. She stood at the threshold, and for a moment I thought it was all a dream. In the dim light, her silhouette seemed almost transparent, as if she might vanish at any second. "I can't sleep," she said after a pause. Her voice was distant, as if she herself didn't understand what she was doing here in my room in the middle of the night. "I need to talk to you." I didn't reply, but I motioned for her to sit on the chair by the wall. She hesitated for only a moment, then sat down trying to keep her distance, but it made things feel even stranger. Her hands nervously fidgeted with the hem of her shirt, and I realized she was just as tense as I was. "I don't know how to explain this," she began after a long pause. "What's happening? I can't make sense of it, but I know I can't keep going like this. It's too heavy." Her words echoed in my mind. I had thought the same many times but couldn't find the right words to say it aloud. Megan spoke calmly, but I could see she was struggling with herself, with what was going on inside her. "We both know this is wrong," she continued, "and yet something keeps pulling us back to it over and over. Why? Why can't we stop?" I looked at her, but I didn't know how to answer. The words were stuck in my throat. This all felt like some strange play where we were both playing roles that weren't meant for us. "I've tried to understand what it means," she said, her voice growing a bit louder, though still restrained, "and every time I come to the conclusion that we need to stop. But I can't." Megan stood up from the chair and came closer. She stood right in front of me, and I could feel her presence with frightening clarity. I wanted to say something to take a step back, but I couldn't. Instead, I looked up at her, and in that moment everything seemed to collapse. She slowly sat down next to me on the edge of the bed. We weren't touching, but her closeness felt almost unbearable. I saw that she was waiting for something, though I couldn't understand what we both knew. We shouldn't keep going, but neither of us could find a way to stop. "William," she whispered again, her voice barely audible. "I can't pretend this doesn't matter anymore. It does, and it won't just go away." Her words cut through me like a sharp blade. Everything we had both been trying to ignore suddenly became real. I realized we wouldn't be able to escape from this. Suddenly, she gently touched my hand, her fingers warm and trembling slightly. The touch was unexpected, but I didn't pull away. I knew I should have, but instead I let her continue. Her hands slowly slid across mine and I felt my heart racing. This touch was different than before. It felt almost desperate yet soft. At the same time, as if she wasn't sure what she wanted, our eyes met, and in that moment I realized that all the boundaries had disappeared. I leaned slightly forward and our lips met again. This kiss was different from all the others. It was slow, almost fleeting, as if neither of us was sure this should be happening. We seemed to be searching for an answer to the question that had been tormenting us both when she pulled away. I didn't know what to say. All I could do was look at her, knowing that neither she nor I would ever be able to go back to how things were before. The next few days were strange and filled with anxiety. I felt like I was suspended between reality and something intangible, something that kept my mind in a constant state of confusion. After what had happened that night, I tried to avoid Megan, but every time we crossed paths in the house, I felt her gaze on me. That look was filled with the same doubts and fears that were swirling in my own mind. We both knew we had gone too far and didn't know how to retreat. One evening, while I was sitting on the porch with a book in my hands, unable to focus on reading, Megan came outside. I heard the door creak, but I didn't turn my head. She sat next to me and once again silence enveloped us. We sat for a long time quietly watching the sunset, the tension between us becoming unbearable. "We can't go on like this," she suddenly said softly, breaking the silence. I put the book down on my lap, unsure how to respond. Her words were true. We couldn't continue this charade, pretending that everything was under control. "I know," I forced out, still not looking at her. Megan sighed heavily and I heard exhaustion in her voice. "Dad will be back soon and I just can't imagine looking him in the eyes knowing what we've done." Her voice trembled and I realized she was close to breaking down. "It's like a trap we can't escape from." I finally turned my head and looked at her. Megan seemed lost and tired. Her eyes were red, as if she hadn't slept in a long time. Her words reminded me that every moment we spent together only made the situation worse, and now we were both standing at the edge of a cliff, not knowing how to avoid the fall. "We really can't continue," I said quietly, feeling a tightness in my chest, "but I don't know how to stop." Megan lowered her head and ran her hand through her hair. Her shoulders slumped slightly, and she looked like the weight she was carrying was too much for her. I felt a sharp sense of guilt. The realization that we had gone too far haunted me. "I always thought I could control my feelings," she said, her voice getting quieter. I tried to convince myself that it was just a passing attraction, that it would go away. But with each day it only gets worse. I stayed silent, not knowing what to say. The words seemed to be stuck in my throat. I understood that none of this should have happened, but how could we find the right solution? We had already crossed too many lines. "Dad loves you," I finally said, realizing that these words were both painful and inevitable. "We can't betray him like this." Megan clenched her fists and closed her eyes. I could see her fighting with herself, trying to find a way out that wouldn't lead to disaster. "I know," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I know it's wrong, but how do we go back? William, we've gone too far." We fell silent again. Each of us was lost in our own thoughts, realizing that there was no easy way out of this. I wanted to believe that we could somehow fix everything, but deep down, I knew that there were no options left that wouldn't hurt someone. Suddenly, Megan turned toward me and her face became serious in her eyes. I saw something that made me tense up. "We have to stop this now," she said, her voice firmer, "right now before everything falls apart completely. I can't keep living with this burden." I nodded, but the words were hard to say. I knew she was right, but something inside me still clung to the part of me that didn't want it to end. Megan stood up and took a few steps toward the edge of the porch. The wind gently ruffled her hair, and she looked as if she were preparing to take an important step. I watched her trying to find the strength to end all of this. "William," her voice softened again when she turned to face me. "I don't want to keep running from what I feel, but I can't let this destroy everything we both know. This will only lead to something worse." She took a step toward me, and I felt a sharp pang in my chest. Megan came closer, stopping just a few steps away. Her eyes were filled with pain and something else I couldn't understand. She reached out and gently touched my cheek. It was unexpected, but her touch was barely noticeable, like a light breeze. I didn't pull away, though. I knew I should have. Her hand slowly slid across my face, and in that moment I realized that I wouldn't be able to stop what was about to happen. Our lips met again, but this time it was different. The kiss was slow and quiet, as if we both understood that this was the last moment we could allow ourselves to be so close. There was no rush, no doubt, just the feeling that this was a farewell. When she pulled away, her eyes were filled with tears that she was trying to hold back. "We need to stop," she whispered, and I nodded again. Even though everything inside me resisted the last few days after our conversation, and that kiss felt like a blur. Megan barely spoke to me. We tried to avoid each other, though that was nearly impossible in the same house. My father returned unexpectedly early, and his presence added even more tension. Now every dinner, every glance, every chance meeting in the hallway felt loaded with unbearable tension. One evening, as the three of us sat at the table, the silence became so loud that it felt like it would crush me. My father was in a good mood talking about work, but I barely listened. My eyes kept drifting toward Megan, and every time our gazes met, she quickly looked away. Her face remained emotionless, but I knew that inside she was going through the same turmoil as I was. We were both on the edge. After dinner, my father went to his office and I stayed in the kitchen clearing the table. Megan slowly approached me, and for a moment we were alone. I could feel that she wanted to say something, but she hesitated. The silence was deafening. "We need to talk," she finally said quietly. Without looking up, I froze, holding a plate in my hands, and slowly nodded. The weight of everything that had happened was growing heavier with each passing day, and I knew we couldn't keep pretending that everything was normal. We stepped out onto the porch, where the cool evening air eased some of the heat that I felt building up inside. Megan stood next to me, her arms crossed over her chest, staying silent. The sky had already darkened and everything around us was quiet. "I can't do this anymore," she finally said. Her voice was barely a whisper, but I could hear everything she hadn't been able to say before. "I thought I could handle it, but it's destroying me from the inside." I nodded slowly, but I didn't know what to say. We both knew we were at a dead end, that this moment had been coming for a long time, but every word I wanted to say felt wrong. "Dad can't find out," I said. Even though it was obvious, Megan bit her lip and nodded. Her eyes were filled with pain and I could see she could no longer hide it. "I tried to stop it," she whispered, "but now I don't know how we can keep living like nothing happened." My chest tightened with the realization. We had both cornered ourselves and there was no easy way out, and we both knew it too well. "William," she said, and in her voice I heard something new, an urgency, a desperation that hadn't been there before. "I'm leaving. I have to go." Her words hit me like a bolt of lightning. I couldn't immediately understand what she meant. Was she serious? Leaving? Leaving my father? Leaving me? All these questions hit at once, and I felt the ground drop out from under me. "You're leaving?" I asked. Not believing my ears, she nodded, and there was a determination on her face that I had never seen before. "It's the only way to fix this. I love your father, but I can't live with this weight anymore." Her voice trembled, but she kept speaking, as if afraid that if she stopped, she'd lose the courage to continue. "I'm leaving tomorrow morning. I've already packed my things." My heart stopped. Tomorrow. That was too soon. I couldn't grasp how everything could end so quickly and so abruptly. "What do I tell Dad?" I finally managed to ask, struggling to get the words out. "Tell him I'm tired, that I need time," she replied, barely holding back her tears. "He deserves the truth, but not the truth that will destroy him." She stepped closer to me and placed a hand on my shoulder, and I felt that same heavy weight that had been pressing down on us for days. "I'm sorry, William," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "I shouldn't have dragged you into this." I didn't know what to say. The words wouldn't come, and instead I just stood there, feeling like everything around me was falling apart. She took a step back, and in that moment I realized that everything between us was over. But just then the door to the house opened and my father appeared on the porch. He stood in the darkness, his face barely visible, but I felt my heart stop. He stood there silently, watching Megan and me. The moment stretched out like an eternity. What had he seen? What did he know? The three of us froze, and in that moment, in the complete silence, I realized that nothing would ever be the same again.